Well, our special guest on Left, Right and Centre today is US Congressman Bera, who has the distinction of being the only Indian American elected to the US House of Representatives right now. He's been a key figure in cementing India-US ties, particularly over the last year or so, in which we have seen a greater momentum in the relationship, including having President Obama here as chief guest on Republic Day exactly a year ago. He's visiting Delhi again, and we're happy to have him here in the studio with us. Congressman Bera, wonderful to have you today.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are coming to Delhi at a very important time. Important, I say, because it's just in the aftermath of the terror attack that took place in Pathankot. And you are also the co-chair of the very powerful and important India caucus in the US House, which has been very vocal in its condemnation of what happened there. How much of concern is there in the US Congress today over what we've seen happen in Pathankot? Because I also saw a number of other senators and congressmen individually also express their concern, which we haven't really seen in the past.
Yeah, I think there's a real concern because, we see India as a very key ally. We see this common terrorism threat. And as India is trying to make steps forward to stabilize the region, the Prime Minister's surprise visit to Pakistan on Christmas Day, and then to have this in the aftermath, we want to see the momentum continue to move forward in stability and peace here. And India obviously is a key ally in stabilizing this region.
Is there a sense, though, that in the caucus itself, there is a greater concern now related to India's concerns on terrorism vis-a-vis the past, and particularly with the kind of aid that Pakistan, for instance, gets from the United States, and whether that's really amounting to anything in terms of its fight on terrorism?
Absolutely. I think the United States recognizes that terrorism is not just a regional issue any longer. It's something that is very much interconnected. So the threats that India faces certainly are similar to the threats that the United States faces. So we have this common bond, and as India gets attacked, I think it does, for members of Congress at least, we are very sensitive to that.
Do you feel that Pakistan is doing enough, though? Because it makes that distinction between groups that fight against India or attack India and groups that it's taking on its western borders.
You almost worry that these attacks came in the immediate aftermath of the Prime Minister's visit to Pakistan. Again, I think India has been very measured in its response. I think there's a desire to continue to see diplomacy work and move towards some normalization and stability between India and Pakistan. And again, I think the Indian government in India has been very measured. From the congressional perspective in the United States, we'd like to see this move forward. And again, I think Congress and the administration in the United States should have a role in supporting India's efforts here.
I was reading, and I didn't know that this was such a staggering figure. The New Yorker had an article just recently saying that since 9/11, and they're quoting congressional reports, the US has spent about $18 billion in aid to Pakistan. And that's a staggering amount. And the question they have asked in that piece is whether this is a good idea, whether Pakistan in turn is doing enough to act on terror.
I think that's a reasonable question.
Is that a question that
I think
more and
it's
more
a reasonable
people are
question. I think there are members of Congress that question whether Pakistan is doing enough to counter terrorism. I think many of us have raised that exact question. If Pakistan wants to be a lead player here, they really do have to have a role in combating counterterrorism. As we look at creating some stability in Afghanistan, we certainly don't want to go back to the Afghanistan of 2-3 decades ago. Again, India has to play a lead role here, but Pakistan, more importantly, has to play a role in squashing terror. And
so that question is being asked more and more about the money that's being given there and what you're getting in return from Pakistan.
Very much so. I can speak as members of Congress, and for this member of Congress, we're certainly asking that question.
You're also coming at a time when India-US relations are generally on the upswing. And how would you, since you were here when President Obama was here and you followed it up with another visit soon after, what have you seen change in the relationship? Would you say that it's steadily sort of moving along, and are we doing what they had envisioned, basically?
We're making progress. Progress is never as fast as everyone would like to see. I think both the Prime Minister and the President are committed to this relationship. The Prime Minister came to my home state in California, a few months ago, and had this overwhelming reception. So the commitment's there. I think on the business side, you certainly see that commitment as well. You're seeing more rapid progress on the defense-to-defense cooperation, and you see the DTI treaty signed. So you have a framework by which to see this progress. Again, is it happening fast enough? Many of us would hope to see it happen faster, but it is continuing to move forward.
So you think you think there are areas where it could be faster?
I
and
think so. Right?
What is that, and where would you like to see it improve? Where do you think the scope for improvement is?
I think there are a couple areas that we have some common ground on. The Prime Minister has a big agenda for infrastructure. I think if the ease of letting U.S. capital flow into some of these projects, I think that would certainly be helpful.
That's not happened yet. That
it's starting to. Well, I think you have to create the financial markets that allow venture funds, and you don't have the mature financial markets like you do in the United States. So again, that's someplace where we could be helpful. In India, you have this huge population of young people. I think our universities should be partnering with India to help the skilling effort. So,
but do American companies think that it's easier to do business today in India than it was a couple of years ago? What's the real sense?
I think they do. I think they see progress. I think you're seeing more presence of U.S. companies here. You're seeing more presence of U.S. companies building and making it in India as well. So, it is very much different than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
One of the issues that's rankling though right now in the relationship is the very high visa fee, the H-1B visas, and I'm sure that that's a feedback you would have already got on this visit. And the industry body FICCI issued a statement the other day saying that this hike is discriminatory and that it would hamper the growth of the US economy and be discriminatory to Indian IT companies. How are you looking at this concern that FICCI is raising?
I have some concerns as well. I mean, I think if we hinder the flow of high-skilled individuals from India being able to come help our companies, that also has the impact of hampering our economy as well. So, now it is in the phase where how do they implement this rule, et cetera. So we're going to try to make sure it's not implemented in a discriminatory fashion.
So you have your own reservations as
Absolutely.
well. Are there lots of other congressmen who share that?
Some of it's domestic politics. This was a huge bill that funded our government. So I'm not sure people have paid as much attention. Again, we're trying to make other members aware of it.
Well, one of the interesting things, again, and timing is great because you're here at a time when we're also in the middle of a fascinating US election campaign that's being watched very closely all over the world. Indian Americans are the third largest group among Asian Americans in the United States. Yet you're the only Indian American congressman in a house of what, more than 500?
Right, 535.
Why is it? Why is there such a disproportionate sort of representation of Indians in the U.S. Congress?
I think we're still a very young demographic. My parents were probably in that generation that came here in the 50s to the United States. So I'm the first generation that was born and raised. I think you're seeing a rising generation, though. You have Kamala Harris running for the Senate in California. Her mother is Indian American. You have 4 or 5 viable candidates running for the House of Representatives.
There are a lot more candidates this time, aren't there?
There are, yes.
From Indian origin.
So I think it's just the natural progression.
But politics aside, I mean, Nikki Haley is sort of becoming a much talked about star in the Republican Party right now. You're on the other side of the fence. What did you think of her comeback to Donald Trump the other day, for instance?
It's great to hear Nikki Haley, kind of come back. I think on the Republican side, she's certainly going to be on the short list of folks that are considered for vice presidential candidates.
That would be quite something for
Absolutely.
An Indian American.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So are you hoping to see more Indian Americans in Congress this year?
Oh, very much so, right? I mean, it is a shame that there's only one Indian American in Congress. Again, if we're just representing the proportion of the population that we are, we'll have 2 or 3. And again, there's 4 or 5 viable members running for Congress this cycle, so we should have more elected.
What do you think, and I love this, this is a question I've been asking so many people since I went to cover the initial stages of the campaign a few months ago. What do you think of Donald Trump? Because when I went a few months ago, people were still trying to write him off, and he's still there, and he's growing. He's becoming stronger.
I wouldn't underestimate Donald Trump. You asked me what I think of Donald Trump. He doesn't speak for me.
Certainly. But why do you think he's popular?
I think he's tapping into some frustrations that the public feels. I think the world's changing. I think they're a population that is grappling with the steep recession. Life's changed, so there's some anger. There's also frustration that Washington D.C. is not paying attention to what's happening in mainstream America. I think he's tapping into that very well.
That anti-establishment sort of, he's the anti-establishment
guy. Yeah, that
guy.
Anti-establishment component, but he's also a remarkable salesperson as well. So again, but governing is very different than selling a product.
But does it worry you when you see him soaring in the polls despite the kind of statements that he's made? I mean, he's spoken against Muslims, against women, against Mexicans. He's attacked everybody.
Very much so, it worries me. I'm a Democrat, though, so he's soaring in the polls on the Republican side. It'll be interesting to see if he can actually maintain this when people actually have to cast their ballot.
And from the Democratic race, we've seen that Hillary Clinton in the latest poll still has sort of an overall quite a big lead over Bernie Sanders. But did you find the numbers of Iowa and New Hampshire interesting, where Bernie Sanders actually seems to be, clicking at her heels?
I think Bernie Sanders is going to give her a race. I think it's making Secretary Clinton a better candidate. At the end of the day, though, I think, just if you look at the overall electorate, I think Hillary Clinton still is the nominee for us. You
still think that?
Yes.
And so, even if Iowa or if New Hampshire, for instance, where Sanders is shown to be leading right now, if it doesn't go her way?
He could potentially win both Iowa and New Hampshire. I think then Hillary Clinton probably picks up South Carolina. And then, as you look at the rest of the states, they really do skew a little bit more towards Hillary Clinton. Now, if Bernie Sanders starts to pick up South Carolina and Nevada and some of the other states, then we may be in for a long primary season.
And where do Indian Americans stand? I mean, do they vote do they generally vote politically as a community generally for the Democratic Party, or do you see them sort of more diverse now politically?
If you look at the last presidential election, the Indian American community voted probably about 65-70% for Barack Obama. I think they still skew towards the Democratic Party. I think they're probably a little bit more conservative on the fiscal issues. That said, I think the Clintons are very highly regarded in the Indian American community, and I think they'd find some broad support.
Well, Congressman Bera, it was wonderful to talk to you on a whole range of issues. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.